Have you ever noticed how airports generally do a good job of maintaining runways and facilities, but they don't really view continuing pilot education to improve safety as part of their mission? Well, not so at the Truckee, California Airport, where terrain and density altitude contribute to a higher accident rate there. Stick around to hear about the unique challenges at Truckee and what that airport is doing to incentivize more pilot training. Hello again, and welcome to Aviation News Talk, where we talk general aviation. My name is Max Trescott. I've been flying for 50 years. I'm the author of several books and the 2008 National Flight Instructor of the Year. And my mission is to help you become the safest possible pilot. Earlier in the week, in episode 343, we replayed an episode of the Aviation Careers podcast on which I was a guest, talking about things pilots should know to stay safe while building time to get to the 1,500-hour minimums required for an airline job. So if you didn't hear that episode, you might want to check it out at aviationnewstalk.com/343. And if you're new to the show, welcome. So happy that you found us. Now, so that you stay with us, take a moment right now and on whatever app that you're using to listen to us, touch either the subscribe key or in the Spotify or Apple podcast app, the follow key, so that next week's episode is downloaded for free. And this is a listener-supported show. We've got lots of ways that you can show your support for the show. So if you would take a moment, go on out to our support page at aviationnewstalk.com/support, where you'll find links to support the show via Patreon, PayPal, Venmo, and Zelle. And when you make a donation, I'll read your name on the show. Coming up in the news for the week of August 5th, 2024, a former flight instructor charged with manslaughter after a fatal plane crash. Insurance premiums are going up. And we'll tell you about the unusual reason some airplanes and helicopters will be flying low over New York State later this month. All this and more, and the news starts now. From StarTribune.com, instructor charged with manslaughter in Pennsylvania plane crash. A flight instructor charged with involuntary manslaughter for a crash that killed a student pilot in Easton, PA, had surrendered his pilot certificate after 2 prior crashes with students aboard, prosecutors said in an indictment. The pilot, age 36 of Haddon Township, New Jersey, was in command of the single-engine Piper PA-28 when it left Queen City Airport in Allentown with the student on September 28, 2022, according to the indictment. He told the NTSB that he took control of the plane from the 49-year-old student just after takeoff when they encountered engine problems. The plane soon crashed and caught fire, killing the student, and the former flight instructor was seriously injured. According to federal prosecutors, he knew he was not competent to fly the airplane for several reasons. First, he had twice been instructing students at Central Jersey Regional Airport when their plane veered off the runway during attempted landings, causing substantial damage in incidents prosecutors described as crashes. He then failed a certification exam and surrendered his pilot's license in October 2021. He is also charged with 40 counts of illegally flying with passengers, despite not having a pilot certificate after that date. He pleaded not guilty to the charges and was released on bail. Charges carry a maximum potential sentence of 128 years in prison. From abweb.com, new report projects aviation insurance premiums will reach 20-year high. A new report from insurance provider Alliance Commercial says gross written insurance premiums for the aviation sector are projected to reach a 20-year high of more than $8 billion in 2024. According to them, airlines will contribute approximately 35% of the premiums, while general aviation is expected to count for 47%. The report highlights that most of the value in aviation insurance claims comes from collisions, crashes, and issues with defective products, which together account for 85% of total claims. Contributing factors to rising premiums include an increase in aircraft repair costs. From flyingmag.com, NTSB to focus on fatal PC-12 crash. Investigators from the NTSB have been gathering wreckage from the site of a Pilatus PC-12 crash that killed 7 nearly 2 weeks ago at the Montana-Wyoming border. 3 of the people on board the privately owned aircraft were members of an Atlanta-based gospel group. The aircraft, a 2010 PC-12-47E single-engine turboprop, was piloted by its owner, who along with his wife were also killed in the crash. The PC-12 departed from the West Georgia Regional Airport around 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, stopping at Nebraska City Municipal to refuel. The aircraft lifted off around noon, heading for Billings-Logan International in Montana. Approximately 2 hours into the flight at a cruise altitude of 26,000 feet, the pilot notified controllers there was a problem with the autopilot and he was losing control of the aircraft. The ADS-B data, as recorded by FlightAware.com, shows multiple turns and pitch changes. Ground speed varied from 173 to 319 miles per hour, and at one point the aircraft was ascending at over 5,500 feet per minute. One of the theories that the NTSB will be looking at is the possibility of an in-flight breakup, as the aircraft was not designed for such rapid and extreme altitude and airspeed changes. And by the way, there was another crash earlier this year in which a pilot reported problems with his autopilot, and the aircraft subsequently crashed. That was in Virginia, and that was a Aero Commander, as I recall. From generalaviationnews.com, open door distracts Cirrus pilot. The pilot reported that while departing from the runway at the airport in Nixon, Pennsylvania, the right cockpit door of the Cirrus SR-20 opened. He was unable to close the door, so he decided to return to the airport to close the door on the ground. And by the way, based on my experience, it's virtually impossible to close a Cirrus door in flight, but it doesn't pose a hazard, so don't let that distract you as you fly. Continuing with the story, it says, while on final approach near the runway, he thought he heard the stall warning horn, so he immediately flared the airplane to land. The airplane bounced twice on the runway, so he attempted to abort the landing by advancing the throttle. The airplane veered to the left, exited the runway, and the pilot reduced the throttle in an attempt to maintain directional control. The plane struck the runway's PAPI indicator before coming to rest in a ditch. The airplane's firewall was substantially damaged. Following the accident, the pilot told investigators, quote, "In hindsight, I don't think the sound I heard was the stall warning horn, but rather the sound squealing through the partially open door, which confused me into thinking the aircraft had stalled." Given this information, it's likely the pilot was distracted by the open right door during the landing, which contributed to his loss of control during the landing attempt. Probable cause: the pilot's failure to maintain directional control while landing, resulting in a runway excursion. Contributing to the outcome was the pilot's failure to ensure that the airplane's door was properly secured prior to departure on the accident flight, and a subsequent distraction due to the door during the landing attempt. From generalaviationnews.com, fuel exhaustion fatal for two, and this comes from a final NTSB report. The flight departed Santa Fe Municipal in New Mexico, destined for Peoria International in Illinois. A fuel receipt from the Jet Center at KSAF indicated that 54.2 gallons of fuel was purchased for the Mooney M20K 3 days before the flight. A review of ADS-B data revealed that on the day the fuel was purchased, the airplane departed KSAF and flew one time around the traffic pattern on a flight that lasted about 4 minutes. No additional fuel receipts were located that indicate the plane was refueled following that flight, and no subsequent flights were made until the accident flight. A review of ADS-B data reveals that after the departure, the airplane climbed to an altitude of 15,000 feet and remained at that altitude for the almost 5-hour flight. The data showed the flight is continuous with no stops. When the airplane was about 10 miles west of Peoria, the pilot informed the controller that the engine lost all power. When queried if they would be able to reach the airport, the pilot stated that they would be unable. The last recorded data points showed the airplane traveling west about 675 feet MSL and lined up with a road. Both the pilot and passenger died in the crash. The airplane was equipped with a Shadden Avionics MiniFlow digital fuel management system, which was designed to provide fuel management information under real-time flight conditions. The unit was connected to the engine fuel flow transducers and did not interface with the airplane's fuel quantity indication system. The unit required the pilot to enter the initial fuel on board the airplane, and all calculations and data provided by the unit were based on fuel flow and any provided navigational information. When power was applied to the unit, it displayed the gallons used as 64.9 gallons and the gallons remaining as 10.1 gallons. The unit did not retain data indicating the last time the system was reset to full fuel. Probable cause: a total loss of engine power due to fuel exhaustion. And I would add to that it's entirely possible that the pilot didn't enter the correct data into the fuel monitoring system. And also from generalaviationnews.com, CFI forgets to stop for fuel. And this comes from a final NTSB report. The CFI reported that he and the student pilot departed the short turf runway near Harrah, Oklahoma, with a low fuel load to practice landings at another airport. The flight instructor planned to refuel midway through the flight, but forgot to stop for fuel while observing that fuel quantity gauge indications were low during the flight. While the Cessna 150E climbed out during a go-round, the engine lost power due to fuel exhaustion. The CFI made a forced landing and the airplane hit trees, sustaining substantial damage to both wings. The student and CFI sustained minor injuries in the crash. The CFI attributed the in-flight fuel planning error to a lack of recent flight instructor experience and the distractions of a challenging training environment. Probable cause? The flight instructor's inadequate in-flight fuel planning that resulted in fuel exhaustion and a forced landing. From loftdynamics.com, Loft Dynamics becomes the world's first VR flight simulation training device to receive FAA qualifications. Loft Dynamics, the global leader in virtual reality or VR flight simulation training devices, or FSTDs, announced that the FAA has qualified its VR simulator, the first FAA-qualified VR FSTD in the U.S. Helicopter pilots can now train and receive credit toward pilot ratings in a Loft Dynamics VR FSTD. And you may recall that I flew the Loft Dynamics H-125 helicopter simulator earlier this summer, and if you're interested in hearing more about it, check out episode 338 at aviationnewstalk.com/338. And from generalaviationnews.com, wake turbulence ends training flight. Now, this comes from a NASA ASRS report written by the flight instructor. He wrote, continuing continuous left-closed traffic operations on runway 20 left at John Wayne Orange County Airport in California in a Cessna 172 with myself sitting left seat and students sitting right seat as they are training for CFI. An Airbus A320 was landing on the parallel runway 20 right, and we were advised to maintain visible separation and caution wake turbulence. We accepted and were cleared for the option runway 20 left. Airbus A320 continued to land and made it to runway 20 right, while we were turning base to final runway 20 left. Winds were reported and observed to be a right crosswind, so we altered our flight path to remain above that of the Airbus. And let me add something here. Standard wake turbulence guidance is to fly a flight path to a touchdown point beyond where a large aircraft touches down. So in this case, it sounds like this aircraft didn't do that. Continuing on, meanwhile, a 737 moved forward across runway 20 left and hold short of 20 right on Lima. This reaffirmed our decision to remain high to avoid jet blast as well as the landing Airbus's wake. Continuing the descent to land, stable and configured, aircraft encountered the onset of wake turbulence forces and began to roll right, uncommanded, directly above the 20 left threshold at approximately 75 to 100 feet AGL. I instructed the student to immediately initiate a go-around, to which there was a delayed reaction. Within 1 to 2 seconds after command was given, aircraft encountered substantially stronger wake turbulence forces and abruptly rolled uncommanded to the right, departing controlled flight rolling to approximately 40 degrees of bank and minus 10 degrees of nose pitch down. With students' delayed reaction to go around, I commanded my controls, which were not relinquished, causing me to forcefully take the controls with a continuous verbal command given in a raised voice. With forceful takeover of the controls, immediate full power was commanded to avoid contacting the ground and the 737 holding between the runways on Lima. Aircraft was on a collision course with the 737's left wing section, which was narrowly avoided after regaining controlled flight by a margin of 20 to 50 feet from the 737 and 15 to 30 feet from the ground. After successfully maneuvering to avoid collision, continued a recovery and climb back toward runway 20 left centerline as the aircraft made it roughly to the location of the runway 20 right Pappies at its further deviation. John Wayne Tower was then advised of the go-around and presence of severe wake turbulence. Tower acknowledged and was startled as well as they witnessed the occurrence and asked if we requested any assistance. Advised that we did not require assistance and no aircraft damage was observed. This type of wake turbulence incident has become so common, my flight school now recommends not using this airport for training operations when there is a right crosswind. And finally, from the new 961.com, which is a Buffalo radio station, low-flying planes and helicopters expected across New York. Don't be alarmed if you see low-flying planes and helicopters in the skies over New York State. They're all part of the state's wildlife oral rabies vaccination program. The New York State Department of Health and the U.S. Department of Agricultural, Animal, and Plant Health Inspection Service Wildlife Services, that's a mouthful, are teaming up together to participate in this wildlife vaccination program for rabies. Bait pellets will be distributed by aircraft and by workers on the ground during the month of August. Baiting has already begun in Jefferson County, and baiting is set to begin in Erie County and through parts of western New York starting on August 17th through August 21st. Officials with the health department warned people that they should not touch these tablets when they're dropped. Most packets will be eaten by wildlife within 4 days. Almost all baits will be gone within a week. If packets are not found and eaten, they will harmlessly dissolve, and the exposed vaccine will become inactivated. So another use of aircraft that I had not heard about. Coming up next, a few of my updates, including a discussion on a recent light twin-engine, single-engine emergency that didn't turn out well. And then later we'll talk with Jeff Menasco about the challenges of flying in and out of Truckee and what the airport is doing to improve pilot training there. All right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And now let's get to the good news. Congratulations to Thomas Welling. At age 68, he's passed his instrument rating. Way to go, sir. And if you've got good news to share, just send me an email by going out to aviationnewstalk.com and click on Contact at the top of the page. And now let's talk about the video of the week. This is really fascinating. It is infrared camera shot at night from a CHP helicopter that is chasing a suspect on foot in Sacramento, California. But it is not a normal foot chase. This guy is running across rooftops in a neighborhood, and here's the most amazing thing. He is leaping from one house roof to another, much like in some of the old movies that you may have seen. Now, the police are on the ground. They're too smart to risk their lives leaping through the air, so you definitely need to check that out. And to make it easier to view our videos of the week, I've created a link that's easy for you to remember, and that is go to aviationnewstalk.com/video. And while you're there on that same page, you'll find links that you can use to sign up to support the show via Patreon, PayPal, Venmo, or Zelle. So stop what you're doing now. Take 3 minutes to watch the video and to sign up to support the show at aviationnewstalk.com/video. And now from our What Were You Thinking department. This comes from 6abc.com, a TV station in Philadelphia. It says helicopter makes emergency landing in South Philadelphia after running low on fuel. Said that the pilot steered the aircraft onto Pier 82 near Christopher Columbus Boulevard at, get this, 3:30 a.m. when it was running low on fuel. It successfully landed near the historic SS United States, which is docked in the Delaware River. Police say everyone on board, including 3 men and a woman, were fine and not injured. It says police could not tell us where the helicopter was originally headed, but a flight tracking website shows the chopper left Newark Liberty International Airport at 2 a.m. Now I've looked at the ground track, and it originally left Chester County Airport earlier in the day. It looks like after they took off from Newark, they did a brief sightseeing tour along the Hudson River before turning toward Philadelphia. Now, after its unplanned landing at 3:30 in the morning, 4 hours later, it flew a short distance to Philadelphia International, where it stayed for about 40 minutes, and then flew back home to Chester County Airport. And by the way, this was a 2024 R-44, so a really brand new helicopter. And I pulled out my R-44 POH, since that's the helicopter I fly, and it says the low fuel warning indicates approximately 3 gallons of usable fuel. The engine will run out of fuel after 10 minutes of cruise power. So I imagine that's what happened. They got the low fuel warning because the descent was not a high-speed descent like you would expect from an auto rotation. So this was apparently not an air helicopter that had run out of fuel, but was getting close to running out. Of course, the big question in my mind, probably yours too, does it really make sense to be flying at between 2 and 3 a.m. in the morning? In other words, what were you thinking? Now, pilots make mistakes, and we make a lot more of them when we're fatigued. So this helicopter pilot is lucky the way things turned out. Now, here's someone who was not so lucky. This comes from fox5dc.com. Virginia Flight School closes abruptly, leaving students out thousands of dollars. And it said this particular person had paid the American Aviation Flight School $100,000 up front for the career pilot package. And in an email to customers obtained by Fox 5, American Aviation Flight School explains, quote, "After reflection and exploring every possible scenario, we have come to the conclusion that there is no viable path forward." So if we haven't talked about this before, I strongly recommend not paying large amounts of money up front for flight training. This is the kind of thing that happens from time to time. If you want to hear just an amazing story about this, Google Silver State, which was a large helicopter school with locations across the U.S. in which many students lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And from flightsafety.org, there was an accident on Tuesday when November 8095 uniform, an F-33A Bonanza, was destroyed when it crashed on takeoff from Sundance Airport, that's KHSD, near Oklahoma City. Now, sadly, all 4 people on board perished. This morning, there's more detail, which says the aircraft hit a bale of hay on takeoff and then crashed into the trees, which seems a little odd as the airport has a 5,000-foot-long concrete runway. So I'm guessing there's a little more to this story and that most likely the plane was having some other issues before it hit the bale of hay. And now let's talk about the light twin accident that I had mentioned earlier. The preliminary report is out. This was an aircraft that had a loss of a single engine, so it was flying on just one engine and had an accident in Ohio a couple of weeks ago. The accident is similar to a twin accident we talked about a few months ago that occurred at Steamboat Springs, Colorado. Like that aircraft, this plane made it to the airport, but then had a loss of control accident in the traffic pattern. Now, an important aspect of this accident is that the pilot arrived at the airport with 2,000 feet of altitude to spare and chose to descend in a circle to bleed off that altitude, which is a reasonable strategy. But this begs the question, where near the airport should you circle down if you're having some kind of engine problems? So think about where you would do that as we talk about this accident. The report says on July 19th, 2024, about 7:04 p.m. Eastern Time, a Beech B-60 aircraft, November 23553, was destroyed when it was involved in an accident near Vienna Center, Ohio. The private pilot and 2 passengers were fatally injured. Preliminary data and ADS-B track data obtained from the FAA revealed that the flight departed runway 17 at Plattsburgh International in Plattsburgh, New York, at 4:51 p.m., destined for John Glenn Columbus International Airport in Columbus, Ohio. The airplane proceeded to the southwest and climbed to 16,500 feet. About 50 miles northeast of Youngstown Warren Regional Airport, which is YNG, the pilot informed air traffic control that the airplane's left engine had lost power and he could not maintain altitude. The Arrival East Radar Controller, or YNG Tower, offered information on close-by airports. However, the pilot requested YNG and its longer 9,003-foot-long runway. While descending to YNG, the airplane circled near the approach end of runway 32. Then it proceeded along the center line of runway 32 while continuing to descend. About 3,000 feet from the departure end of the runway, the data indicated that the airplane was close to field altitude at a ground speed of 131 knots. At the end of the runway, the airplane turned left while at a ground speed of 95 knots. The airplane impacted terrain about a quarter mile west of the departure end of runway 32. A witness who was on YNG taxiway Delta observed the airplane in flight prior to the accident. He stated that the airplane circled near the approach end of runway 32, then proceeded with the approach down runway 32. The airplane was higher than normal when beginning the approach. As the airplane proceeded down the runway, it descended toward the runway. However, it did not touch down. At the end of runway 32, the airplane pitched up rapidly to the left and began to flip. So that flip was most likely a VMC roll, which occurs when a twin gets too slow and they're operating on just a single engine. The airplane then descended below his field of view and crashed. The wreckage was located on airport property. A post-accident fire consumed the majority of the wreckage. The landing gear was found in the extended down position. The pilot who owned and operated the airplane possessed both Canadian and U.S. FAA private pilot certificates with airplane single-engine land and airplane multi-engine land ratings. Recorded weather near the time of the accident included wind from 050 at 5, 10-mile visibility, and a few clouds at 5,500 feet above ground level. And here's what I saw when I looked at the ADS-B data on ADS-B Exchange. First, the airport field elevation is 1,191 feet, so remember 1,200 feet as I give you the aircraft altitudes. The altimeter setting at the time was 30.13 inches, so the altitudes I'll give you are corrected for that non-standard pressure. Now, the big issue I see is that after the aircraft arrived at the runway, it circled at a point fairly close to the runway threshold. And the problem with circling at that location is that to make the circling work out, the final circle to join the runway centerline would have to be flown fairly low to the ground. Think of it this way. On a normal 3-degree glide slope, an aircraft loses about 320 feet per nautical mile. This aircraft still had one working engine, so it's likely he could have made a normal 3-degree approach to the airport. Now, imagine you're circling a mile from the runway threshold. As you made your final circle, you'd want to be at approximately 300 feet AGL as you rolled out onto the center line and onto the 3-degree glide path to the runway. Though with that 9,000-foot runway, you'd have lots of room to err on the high side. Now imagine that you're circling at just a quarter of a mile from the threshold. As you rolled out on your circle onto the center line, you'd need to be about 1/4 of 320 feet or at 80 feet AGL as you rolled out onto the center line. Now, most pilots would be extremely uncomfortable starting their last circle at about 600 feet AGL and rolling out of the circle at 80 feet AGL. Because during that circle, the ground would appear to be rushing up at you, and you'd have little margin for error if you got too low. So most pilots would roll out of a circle like this to join the runway at a much higher altitude, and that's essentially what happened to this aircraft. And the result was the plane was too high as it crossed the threshold. The aircraft was at 119 knots and 3,200 feet MSL, or 2,000 feet AGL, when it first reached the runway. It then immediately started a left turn. After completing one circle, the aircraft was at 2,600 feet, so it lost 600 feet in that circle, and it was still at 119 knots. At the end of the second circle, the aircraft was at 2,100 feet and 114 knots. At this point, the aircraft rolled out on runway heading, but it was just 0.23 miles from the threshold, and it was still at 900 feet AGL. Over the threshold, it was at 1,900 feet or 700 feet AGL and 123 knots. The last data point was almost halfway down the runway, and it was at 1,400 feet or 200 feet AGL and 132 knots. Now, the data doesn't capture what witnesses described, which is that at the end of the 9,000-foot runway, the airplane pitched up rapidly to the left and began to flip. Had the pilot made one more circle and lost another 600 feet, things probably would have worked out. However, the pilot would have been at 300 feet AGL as he rolled out of the turn, and most pilots would be understandably nervous circling that low to the ground. In engine-out situations, I've been taught two different ways to circle down. One would be to circle not at the runway numbers, but on the downwind beam of the numbers, often called the key position. That way you'd be flying something a lot closer to a traffic pattern, which may make things appear more familiar and easier to judge. The other method, which I like a lot, is to fly a figure eight back and forth across the center line at perhaps a mile or maybe slightly further from the runway threshold. The nice thing about flying that figure eight is that there are multiple opportunities in that maneuver to conclude that you're at the right height and that it's time to proceed to the runway to land. Also, you're never turned completely 180 degrees away from the runway heading and flying away from the airport. Instead, I make those turns away from the airport in the figure eight so that at most I'm flying a 135-degree angle away from the airport, which would be 45 degrees closer than flying directly away from the airport. Regardless of how you choose to maneuver when handling an engine out, you need to practice it often. Otherwise, if you haven't done it recently, you'll lack familiarity with the maneuver if you have to do it for real. So, sadly again, another light twin that lost one engine and the pilot apparently mismanaged the traffic pattern and then lost control. And hey, it's the beginning of the month. It's that time when, unfortunately, we lose a number of our supporters because their credit cards expire and they never go in to update them. So we're always looking for listeners like you to become supporters to help backfill for the supporters that we've lost at the end of the month. So if you would take a moment right now, head on out to aviationnewstalk.com/support, where you'll see 4 options for signing up to support the show. And of course, when you do, I'll read your name on the show. And speaking of having your name read on the show, aviation is a small community, so listen and see if you know any of these people who've signed up in the last week. My thanks to these 3 people who've signed up on Patreon, including Christopher R., Jim Mitchell, and someone who wants to remain anonymous. We also had a one-time donation from Vincent DeVille via Venmo, and we also had a one-time donation via Zelle from Christopher Vassell, who says that he flies a Bonanza out of Reed Hillview Airport in San Jose. My thanks to all of you for signing up to support the show. Coming up next, our conversation with Jeff Menasco about the Truckee Airport, all right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And now let me tell you a little about Jeff Menasco. He's the Director of Aviation at the Truckee Tahoe Airport, that's KTRK. He previously served in the U.S. Air Force for over 28 years, where his numerous flying positions included squadron, group, and wing commander. He primarily flew the C-130E H&J aircraft, and he also has time in the T-34, the T-47, which is a King Air B-90, the C-21 Learjet 35, C-37, and C-40 737. In his last assignment, he was the Deputy Director of Operations for Air Mobility Command, responsible for operational policy and training for 1,100 mobility aircraft and aircrews. And now here's our conversation with Jeff Menasco. Jeff, welcome to the show. Great to have you here today.
Thanks, Max. I'm looking forward to the conversation today. Thank you for having me.
Well, you reached out to me after episode 322 when I was talking about an accident at Truckee. If you would, tell us about the Truckee Airport and what makes it challenging for pilots to get in and out of there.
Yeah, well, it is a beautiful airfield and a beautiful environment, which generates the demand for folks to come up here. I view it as a graduate level, not a PhD level airport. And a lot of people say, quote unquote, it's dangerous. I wouldn't say the airfield is dangerous by any means, but there are some baked in risks, some hazards that you have to take into account anytime you fly up here. Starting just right at the top, where our field elevation is 5901. So depending on your aircraft power and performance and where you're used to flying, you're going to land with a high density altitude. Even on a standard day, you're landing at 5,900 feet. Today, the temperatures forecast, I think, to be 76 degrees. We'll get a density altitude pushing probably 8,000, maybe higher. On really warm days, we'll get density altitudes over 9,000. So you're in the pattern altitude and your aircraft feels like it's flying around at 11, 12,000 feet. And that'll catch a lot of people off guard. The other piece is the terrain. We effectively sit in a bowl of mountains. And again, it's beautiful, but that creates challenges. So when we're in a marginal or an IFR environment, the approach minimums for weather are very high. There's no great approach to get in here. They're effectively more like IMC letdowns to a certain degree. And then with those mountainous features, there's just a lot of orthographic effects when it comes to winds. So every afternoon, particularly in the summer, we're going to get winds out of the southwest. Pretty much 220 at 15, gust 20 on a stronger day. There'll be 220 at 20, gust 30, gust 35. So high density altitude, no great approaches to get in here based on terrain, windy environment on a daily basis. And you throw in all the other mountain pieces of not lots of great options if you were to lose an engine on a single engine aircraft, weather, icing, lots of unique dynamics when it comes to weather. So those are the baked-in features every day, let alone what's going on with you, what's going on with your aircraft, what's going on with the airspace. If you take everything into account and a pilot sets their own limits before coming here and does their study and is prepared, it's a great place to fly. If you're not ready and don't take all those factors into account, particularly those big three I mentioned between the terrain, the weather, and the density altitude, which are present every day, if you don't take those into account, it can catch you off guard.
We also get some white stuff up there. Tell us how much snow you can get in a single dump or throughout the entire winter.
Yeah, absolutely. So this last winter, the 23-24 winter, we got about 30 feet of snow over the season. On our biggest dump, we got about 4.5 feet here on the airfield. So it took us about 3 full days to remove runways, taxiways, and hangar rows. The winter before, which was one of the biggest winters in 75 years, let me correct that. The big winter, the 23-24 winter, is when we got 30 feet. Last year, the 23-24 winter, we got about 15 feet. But it can be a doozy. And the way we attack snow is we'll start with the main runway, 1129, which is our long runway at 7,000 feet. Open up the taxiways and hangar rows. But in the winter, with the snow we get here, if you don't have a hangar, we don't have de-icing here, it can be a challenging environment. The good news is because of where we are in the Sierras, typically the weather is pretty good. So it's either snowing or it's a sunny bluebird day for enjoying the mountains and skiing. So
great. Well, for folks who are not familiar with Truckee, why is it such a popular destination? Why do you get so many airplanes coming in and out of there?
Absolutely. It is a beautiful area. We're about 5 miles north of Lake Tahoe, just on the east side of the Sierra Crest. And it is a recreational mecca for anyone that likes the outdoors. I think what makes Truckee Tahoe Airport a little bit different based on our geography is we're really close to the Bay Area. So being a 30 to 40 minute flight or a 3 to 4 hour car drive makes recreation in this area super popular with a population that enjoys the outdoors, and it's the backyard of the Sacramento / Bay Area. About 65% of all of our air traffic comes out of the Bay Area, just for reference. The next segment comes up from the Los Angeles area. The remaining 20-ish% can kind of be from anywhere, but it's the Bay Area and Southern California as the vast majority of our aircraft traffic, minus those that live here.
Well, you and I got connected because I had mentioned back in episode 322 that the accident rate at Truckee is significantly higher than at my home airport, which frankly you'd expect since my airport's at sea level. Tell us about the accident history at Truckee and also about a comparison you did with it to another mountain airport.
Yeah, absolutely. So last year, before your episode about the TBM accident in March, me and our chief of safety, Stacy Justinson, went through all the accidents. We started in 1996 and just kind of worked our way. And we looked at accidents that had a major injury, fatality, or aircraft loss. So over the 28-year window, there have been 24 accidents that kind of fall into those three categories. There were tail loops, aircraft that parted the runway, et cetera. But if there wasn't a major injury, fatality, or loss, we didn't count it. So those 24, there's a couple trend areas right off the top. 10 of those are piston aircraft, and most of them are some type of power loss or partial power loss. And of those 10 accidents, about half were high density altitude and gusty winds. So if there was a recipe to have an accident here, it's a piston aircraft, high density altitude in the afternoon with gusty winds. And of those, about half were lower time pilots. And, that's a judgment call is what you call lower time. We lumped anyone with less than 800 hours as a low time pilot. So that was 5 of the 10 for the piston high density altitude. The other trend that popped out of the 24 accidents, 6 of those are IFR. So, a quarter of our accidents are IFR. And of those 6 IFR accidents, all 6 had some type of visual obscuration. So whether it was fog, clouds, smoke, all, 6 for 6 had some type of visual obscuration. 5 of those 6 also were involved in some type of circling maneuver. It was not a straight in where they had an accident departing the final approach fix or in the flare. So 5 of the 6, and as I mentioned earlier, because we sit in a bowl of mountains, the approach with the lowest weather minimums is RNAV 20. So that's the preferred approach, and there's the least amount of terrain, but it brings you to, quote, the short runway, which is 4654 in length. So if you're flying an IFR aircraft, you're likely in some type of jet or a TBM or a Meridian, and particularly for your larger aircraft, your jet crowd, you're probably not going to want to land on the 4,600-foot runway. So fly the RNAV 20, and then you're going to circle 211 or 29. So 5 of the 6, some form of circling. Of those 6, 4 were loss of control, and 2 of them were crash into terrain. And of the 6, 3 were dark or dusk, which I think is interesting. And I think, and this is an important point. People look at sunset. You can look at civil twilight. You can look at nautical twilight to determine what it's like outside. But when here at Truckee, with the Sierra Crest about 5 miles to the west of us, with the setting sun, if you're in an IFR environment, quote, if sunset is 1730 local and I'm shooting the approach at 1720, it's a lot darker than what you're used to thinking, just based on the obscuration of whatever is in the environment, plus the mountains of where the sun actually is blocking that. So I found that interesting. The other piece is of the 6 IFR accidents, half of them were, I'll say, in the missed approach or go around scenario. I lumped the TBM accident of the 30th of March of this year, would put it whether it was in the go around missed approach phase or perhaps circling. So that's kind of the other group that really sticks out, are those those 6 IFR, this is a circling environment just based on terrain. All of them, there's something in the environment that's impacting your visibility. Half of the time, it's in the evening, dusk, dark, and the go-around missed approach. And when you talk to airlines, when you talk to the FAA, as a former military pilot, the go-around missed approach is a challenging maneuver. And I would lump these missed approach go-arounds into the, quote, the surprise, like, oh, I'm not breaking out, we're going around. And if you're not mentally prepared for that, and you're not practicing them, you're not doing them in the sim, and most pilots aren't doing circling maneuvers regularly, there's a lot of stress. There's a high task load that impacts the pilot. And from these 6 IFR accidents that had some type of weather and all of them going on, that's a lot of airplane to be flying. And a lot of these accidents as well, 4 of the 6 were single pilot. If I'm flying single pilot in the weather, mountainous terrain, in a circling approach, and then I go missed approach, that's a lot going on. Not to say that a proficient pilot can't do that. And per the FAA, or Part 91, you certainly can. But I think it's really important from a risk management or ORM perspective to be very steely-eyed and very clear as the level of risk as a pilot you're accepting in a very objective way before you put yourself into that environment. And when we were talking before, I think this might be a good place to talk about at least my theory of flying. I've shared it throughout my military career. I put it into 4 categories of planning, judgment, skill, and luck. Planning is ground speed 0. You as the pilot, whether it's understanding your owner's manual, your technical orders, your takeoff and landing data, all of the ground speed 0 preparation before you take off. The next level down is judgment. Now you're in the aircraft, you're physically maneuvering through the space, or you're at engine start. But judgment, you don't control as much. And that is a mix of knowledge, which you have some control over, and experience. And experience is the act of flying and having those experiences. And pilots develop judgment at different rates. And it's a very individual absorption as to what's going on with your experiences. The next level down is skill. The only time I like to use skill is in the flare. And even there, I'm really trying to be in that judgment category. And there's lots of sayings, but skill is a place you don't want to be. And my definition of skill is I am in the moment. I'm not thinking about anything in the future. I'm just using all of my concentration, my ethos, everything about me right now to physically do something. While it sounds, quote, good to be doing that, it's fun. You always want to be in the judgment, thinking about what's coming up in the future, looking at the weather, looking at, I see roll caps over here, 150 miles in front of me. Now I need to be thinking about winds. And then I'll take it, the last level is luck. And luck is exactly what it sounds. And there's 2 categories. You've maxed your skill and you have nothing left to give but chicken bones voodoo and prayers. Or you have no idea that you're in this situation and you missed the goat on the mountaintop by 6 inches. So the 4 categories, again, planning, judgment, skill, luck. When you look at our IFR accidents and you look at the visual obscurations, the go-arounds, the circling, there's a lot that goes into that planning piece and a lot that goes into the judgment when you're flying into Truckee in some type of IFR environment. And if you back it up a little bit, as we're talking about the high density altitude and gusty winds, it's not as complex, but I think sometimes pilots get caught off guard, particularly if they're used to flying at lower field elevations and winds that are very predictable. If I pull up ATIS and it's information Charlie and winds are 220 at 8 gusts 12, here at Truckee, depending on where I'm at on the airfield, that may not be accurate on a regular basis, just based on the mountainous terrain, orthographic features, thermal uplifting, some bluffs. We can have all 4 windsocks going in 4 different directions. So it really is incumbent on that pilot, regardless of the amount of planning that they've done to prepare. There's a lot of judgment, even on a standard day here, that is a little bit different than other airfields.
Now, I know that you had done a comparison with Truckee Airport to Mammoth Mountain. What did you find? What ways are they comparable? What ways were they different?
Yeah, and just to be clear, it was not a perfect one-for-one, so this is not a scientific study by any means. But when I looked at Mammoth and Big Bear and Truckee, and I worked with our FAA safety representative to try to pull some trends, we were pretty comparable over the same period of time between Mammoth and Big Bear. A little bit different for Mammoth specifically. There were some, what I would say, IFR en route. I'm not talking 70, 80 miles from the airfield, but within 5 to 10 miles of Mammoth, where they had a higher accident rate. I think, again, this is just my hypothesis, is if you've flown there or been there, the terrain is significantly higher. There's a lot of 10, 12,000, Mount Whitney's right around the corner. So it really pushes a general aviation pilot pretty high up there, a lot of performance impacts. Here, it's still high altitude, but our terrain, generally speaking, is lower than the Mammoth environment. Again, those were the only differences that popped out. About the same number of accidents, but the character of the accidents changed a little bit. I've not flown into Mammoth, but when you look at the terrain, I would assume that the winds are probably a little bit more stable than Truckee too, based on, we sit in the middle of a capital letter C with a small out to the northeast. So that's what I learned when I looked at those three. Again, not scientific analysis, but a little bit of a deep dive in the three airports to try to gain some insights specifically for here at Truckee. We're not a lot different. We're unfortunately fairly similar to the other three. There's just more inherent risk flying in a mountainous environment. It can be done safely, but again, planning and judgment really matter.
Well, one thing that I noticed that is different about Truckee, and this is probably unique among airports in the U.S., you have a Fly Safe program. Tell us about that and what you're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely. Last year, our board of directors for California Special District, we went through a strategic plan process. It's the first one the airport's ever, there's master plans, airport layout plans, but kind of those things that don't fit in those FAA documents. And as we went through the strategic planning process, the one thing that all the board members and staff agreed to was that safety was our number one priority. So we put on our thinking caps, and I was a, quote, new employee at the time. I just retired from the Air Force after 28 years and 7 months. And the thing that struck me about general aviation as opposed to military aviation, and tons of friends that fly for the airlines, is as a general aviation pilot, you're really on your own when it comes to continuing education and pilot proficiency, as opposed to a structure around you without standard operating procedures, going to the sim every 6 months, regularly flying with other pilots, instructors, evaluators, going through multiple upgrades. You're really on your own. And so we worked with the FAA Wings program, and this is what we've done is we're trying to create a structure here at Truckee to give our general aviation pilots an opportunity, a forum. And we're not conducting the training, but we're trying to provide the well of general education and pilot proficiency. So in order to do that, for our hangar attendants here, we give them a $70 a month discount on their rent if they complete one FAA Wings phase per year. So under the FAA Wings program, you do a phase every 2 years, and that resets your flight review. What we're doing is we're asking pilots participating in the Fly Safe do one phase per year, and that gets you get to touch the sky with the CFI, and with the $70 a month discount, that's $840, more than offsets the cost of flying with that CFI. The other piece we're doing is we're providing monthly seminars where we try to invite high quality speakers and forums that are a little bit more specific to our flying environment. Starting in February, we've been holding one seminar a month. Our average is 28 pilots per forum. The biggest event has had 88 pilots. And really the takeaway from those seminars, we do them in the evenings, is it's a great forum to increase your knowledge. But what I'm really excited about, and we talked about this before, Max, is provides that opportunity to create some local culture around flying, to get pilots really talking about and exchanging their ideas and their experiences. And I think that's where a lot of the real fantastic learning happens. Beyond that, the program is not limited to our hangar pilots. So if you're a local pilot here and you're renting an aircraft, we will reimburse your CFI up to $300 a year, again, such that to get you in the sky for that phase credit. And the airport believe safety is so important, we're going to help you pursue that. So that's what we've been doing. And next month, August 19th and 20th, we're actually sponsoring a flight clinic. It's a Cirrus flight clinic. So we have Mountain Aviation. It's a local Cirrus training center here. It's one of the higher, if not the highest altitude Cirrus training center in the U.S. And so if you're a fly safe pilot, something that would normally be well over $600, basically you get to attend the one-day flight clinic for free. And that's about 2 to 3 hours of ground instruction in the morning. Then we're going to wait for the winds to get squirrely in the afternoon. And then the pilots will go up and fly with Mountain Lion pilots and go to some unique places here within our Truckee Bowl. Sometimes get pilots caught off guard with some thermals and some different winds. To experience that with an instructor sitting right next to you and to have done the ground training just a few hours prior to that. We have enough slots for 18. And I think last time I checked, we have 10 pilots signed up for that. And this is the first. We're looking at some other opportunities to put on some flight clinics, but we're growing into this. So any ideas you have or anyone listening to this, please feel free to reach out because we are passionate about this. And the board of directors is putting some financing towards it because it's our number one priority.
That's great. I hope other airports are inspired to start doing similar kinds of programs. Now, one of the things I mentioned in the past is that I think the website for the Truckee Airport is one of the best I've ever seen of any airport. Now, one resource that you have that I use a lot are the flight animations that show you the paths to fly for noise abatement. Tell us a little about the noise issues at Truckee and what pilots should know when they're flying in and out of the airport there.
Yeah, absolutely. North Tahoe is a beautiful place. That's what gets people to come up here. Ironically, to include the pilots, once they land here, they want to be outside, whether it's hiking in the backyard, on a grill, backcountry skiing, they want it quiet. So there's that duality of everyone wants to come here, but the reason that people want to come here is for that tranquility. So we live in what I would categorize as a noise sensitive community, and a lot of airports are, rightfully so. So what we've done is we've really tried to structure and put information online to provide, I use the word procedures very loosely. They're not procedures, but to provide some ways in and out of Truckee that are, quote, quiet. We also have a fly quiet incentive program for local pilots to participate in. And quite honestly, our runway 0220 is our quietest runway. It's shorter, but when you look at, particularly for single engine aircraft, runway 0220 has the best options in terms of if you have some type of engine loss or partial engine loss, there are some good ditching areas for 0220, and it's the quietest. The other piece that we've created is we call it the shoulder hour. So for local tenants for our Fly Quiet program, we ask that they don't fly from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. But if they use the shoulder hour protocols from 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. or 6 a.m. to 7 a.m., it's to depart some departures that are basically we get no noise complaints. So if you depart 02 or 20, kind of headed up towards Brockway and out towards the agricultural station, or on the radios we refer to it as the scales. And then whether you're departing to the east or if you're heading to the west, get on a VFR hemispheric altitude once you get on Interstate 80 and cross over the Sierra Crest. By the way, that's also particularly for your single engines, the safest departure because you have some options as you're getting over that Sierra Crest, gaining some energy and some altitude. So all of this is on our website, both under noise abatement and under our flight quiet procedures. And we've just been really active with working with local pilots and trying to provide good information for how to get in and out of here as quietly as possible to be respectful of the local community. And all those pilots that are coming here as well are also enjoying the peace and the serenity and the beauty that the High Sierra offers.
Well, speaking of useful things, I noticed that there's an emergency landing guide on the website, which I hadn't seen before. And it's kind of helpful and unique. I don't remember seeing one where essentially you're mapping out the different fields and open areas that pilots might land in an emergency. How did that map come about?
Yeah, the map predates me. So the prior director of aviation, Hardy Bullock, worked with some of the local CFIs, went out, and I will say we mapped, but used a drone, walked the areas. And so like a lot of airports, there's kind of the, oh, hey, Max, what do you do, if you're departing off runway 1634, et cetera. So we tried to take some of that anecdotal knowledge that the different CFIs were using and put it onto paper, walk the ground, give some dimensions, and to publish it. And there's, I wouldn't say controversy, but there has been some concern, should we as a GA airport put this online? And our position has been yes. We're very clear that these are not surveyed, these are not FAA designated, emergency bailout areas. But for the local flying community, I think it's important that you don't have to be a longtime local that is friends with 3 or 4 different CFIs that knows all the hip pocket places that you can put your aircraft down. Particularly with an airfield at 5901 field elevation, I think it's a smart way for us to be good stewards of the airport. We don't tell pilots how to fly in the environment. There's anything and everything we can do to make this as safe as possible. We're going to do it. So that's where it came from. I think it's pretty cool.
I totally agree. I really love it. And I hope other airports will consider creating a similar emergency landing guide to fields around the airport. It's really, really helpful.
Absolutely.
Now, I know you were a squadron commander. Tell us a little bit about the safety culture of squadrons and how that might apply to general aviation pilots.
Of course. I was very fortunate. I was a C-130 squadron commander. I was also an operations group commander and a wing commander in the Air Force, all the flying organizations. But I think the heart of military aviation and some pieces and parts that can relate to general aviation is that culture. And in a flying squadron, when standards of deviance are accepted, and it's a wink, wink, nod, nod culture, it's very profound impacts. As humans, we respond beyond what the technical order says. We respond to those humans around us. And you're looking, when it comes to ego, when it comes to praise from peers, superiors, or those that you're leading, it's a very powerful human emotion draw. So what I did, and it's not unique to me in the military flying culture, but just to kind of give some of that experiences and how we really tried to amplify that is and we were C-130s, so we were in Tokyo, Japan. And a big piece of our mission was low flying and airdrop, whether it was equipment or personnel or supplies. And it's a challenging mission. So what we would do is every Friday we would have academics. And as a squadron commander, I was adamant I would be in the room with my leadership and all the crews of the squadron. So it'd be anywhere from 80 to 90 people. And we would provide academics on something that was a little bit unique or different that everyone was going to attempt to do next week. And we would spend anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes dissecting. We'd look at the procedures of what the book says. We would have some of our more senior instructors or weapons officers talking about it. What are parameters? How can you evaluate whether you executed this well? And then we tasked all of our mission commanders, and those are the pilots that would be leading the formations next week. And typically there's a morning formation, evening formation. So you would have anywhere from 8 to 10 formations in a week, typically of 3 to 4 aircraft. And then the following Friday, we would debrief that procedure that we had practiced that week. And then we would brief, what are we going to do next week? And so by having that cycle where we could all focus on something, all go out, experience and fly it, and then debrief it in a very open environment. I would say non-judgmental, or it's what the FAA refers to as just culture. And to identify, hey, in the execution doing that, I messed this up. The book doesn't say this. There's different tactics, techniques, procedures. Nothing prepared me for X, Y, Z. I ended up over speeding the flaps, or whatever it happens to be. And so by providing this problem set for us to go out and try, experience it together, debrief it together, learn about it, was a real powerful way of creating that open culture of talking about flying in that non-judgmental way for all of us to learn. And instead of it being a hide, nobody sees this because I messed this up, rather just the opposite, and to reward the pilots, the navigators, the flight engineers for coming forward and sharing what they experienced in that very open, honest forum. And it creates a very powerful culture of self-correction, wanting to be that aviator that's always learning, always improving their knowledge, and is not afraid to say, hey, I messed this up. The FAA's pursued this with a just culture. You can submit ASAPs. There's a lot of different ways and forums to do that. But I think it's a really powerful culture that does amazing things in aviation. And too often I see pilots say things or hear about things where something happens, they try to hide it. And it's just the opposite. What that pilot should be doing is saying, hey, look, I heard this. I thought it meant that. I messed this up. This is how you can be better, Max, or this is how you tell me, and this is how I can be better. But I think it's incumbent upon all of us to help each other be better aviators with that open culture of learning and non-judgment. It's very powerful. And so back to the Fly Safe program, one of the hidden gems, and it's not in our policy documents, is creating that environment on a monthly basis. Odds come together. We talk about something that relates to all of us. And we get to share those experiences and then hopefully learn from each other and holding each other a little bit. I don't say accountable as a finger pointing, but holding each other accountable in terms of always learning to be better aviators. You don't just, quote, get that certification and you're done growing, learning. If there's anything about aviation, every flight, every sortie is a learning opportunity if treated appropriately. That's how I see the Fly Safe culture of a flying squadron kind of all fitting together, and whatever we can do to help recreate a little bit of that here at Truckee Tahoe Airport, I think is nothing but a win. So that's my theory of how it all fits together, Max. I'll tell you in a couple of years how good we do it.
Well, we definitely will have you back, hopefully sooner than a couple of years, to find out how it's working. And we've kind of gone full circle here. You started talking about how general aviation pilots don't have a structured learning environment, and that's what you had in the squadron, and of course what you're trying to create through the Fly Safe program. Where do pilots go to find out more about the Truckee Airport?
Absolutely. Go to our website, and if on the top right corner, there's a tab for Fly Safe. If you go to the Fly Safe tab, there's a QR code that'll pop down. There's some information on how to participate. There's a list of all the events. We've recorded some, not all of them. And when we do the Fly Safe events, we do it through the FAA's Wings website. Of course, we post it and have the link here. And you don't have to live here. You don't have to have your aircraft registered here. If you're a San Carlos pilot that flies up here regularly, our only requirement to participate in the Fly Safe program is that you, quote, fly into Truckee regularly. We have not defined that as once a quarter, once every 6 months. But if you've flown up here before and you want to participate, you're welcome to. And that to include the $300 reimbursement to go fly with the CFI to earn that phase credit once per year. So go to our website. The information's there. The next event we have is in August, is the Cirrus Flight Clinic. That's, again, not just limited to Truckee pilots. And then in September, I believe the Fly Safe seminar topic is going to be the Air Race Classic. We sponsored a team here of two of our local pilots, Raj and Sarah. And of the 50 teams, they came in second place, which is pretty cool. And I won't dive into the Air Race Classic topic, but log in and attend the seminar in September and listen to them talk about their experiences. And it's really cool. A little bit of a spoiler. It's not how fast your aircraft based on performance. You get it checked out. It's a week-long race of, we'll go back to what I said earlier about planning and judgment. It's not a skill. How long can I redline my engine? But it's a planning and judgment race. And they nailed it, coming in second place in a Cessna 172. So you get to hear about them in September.
And where is the Truckee website on the web?
Yeah, Truckee Tahoe Airport.com. So just right in our name.
Super. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Max, thank you for having me. I enjoy listening to your podcasts. And what really struck my interest is, I believe it was the episode 322. I thought you did a really good job of discussing the TBM with just the facts available at the time. And so I thought it was well done. So thank you for what you're doing as well.
And my thanks to Jeff Menasco for joining us here today. You can find out more about his work in the Truckee Airport at truckeetahoeairport.com. And just a quick reminder, if you're thinking you might be buying a new headset soon, please consider buying a Lightspeed headset. They are my favorite headset, the only ones I've used for over 25 years, and I highly recommend them. And Lightspeed is willing to help support the show anytime you buy a new headset directly from them, but only if you first go to aviationnewstalk.com/Lightspeed. And from there, go to their website. And if you do that, they'll send us a check to help support the show. Thanks so much. And just remember aviationnewstalk.com/Lightspeed. And of course, I love hearing from you. If you have any feedback about the show, for example, do you like the new video of the week we're doing or any other kinds of things, let me know. Go on out to aviationnewstalk.com and click on Contact at the top of the page and offer any advice you have for improving the show. And of course, one of the best ways you can help us is to tell not just one or two friends, tell all of your aviation friends about Aviation News Talk and encourage them to subscribe to the show. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blues sign up, and remember that you can always go around.